Greetings, my scattered brothers and sisters in the Lord. Trust you know that the Lord is with you wherever you are scattered, and that the Lord will see you through this day. We are at the grave, the tomb of Lazarus, and Jesus has just arrived. We're John chapter 11 still. Jesus has arrived at Lazarus' tomb. He's had his conversations with Martha and Mary, the sisters of the dead man Lazarus, and both have said to Jesus that if you would have been here, my brother would not have died. And Jesus has asserted from the very beginning that he is going to raise Lazarus from the dead. And Jesus now tells them to remove the stone that covered the tomb. The tomb was actually a cave that they had placed Lazarus in, wrapped him in grave clothes, and given him a proper burial. And he's entombed, this stone in front of the cave. And Jesus tells them to move the stone, remove it. And Martha tells Jesus that Lazarus has been dead for 4 days, and by this time there'll be a terrible odor. And Jesus says, but didn't I tell you you would see the glory of God if you believed? So they removed the stone. I assume that they're probably a little bit reluctant, probably a little bit wondering, okay, what's Jesus actually going to do? But they follow through, they obey, and they remove the stone. Once the stone is removed, Jesus calls out, Lazarus, come forth. And sure enough, Lazarus hears the voice of Jesus, even though he's 4 days dead, and he comes forth walking out of his grave. Then Jesus gives the command to unbind him, loosen him from his grave clothes, so that he's no longer bound in these trappings of death, and get him some real clothes to wear. And Jesus did this sign, and Lazarus is alive, and people go forth talking about what Jesus just did. Now, it's amazing, and want to focus in on maybe three things. Um, could divide these things in terms of the work of the church and the work of Jesus. So the work of the church, in some sense, is to remove stones that cover graves. And I'm not sure that the stone had to be removed so that Lazarus could hear the voice of Jesus. I mean, he was dead and he heard the voice of Jesus, so I doubt that that's it. I think the stone needed to be moved away so that the living Lazarus could come forth from the grave. And I can't help but wonder why Jesus didn't do that himself. Why didn't Jesus just speak and the stone be moved? Why did Jesus involve people in moving the stone so that Lazarus could come forth? And maybe in some sense, that's the work of the church, that when Jesus speaks to people, when Jesus calls their name and they come to life, then it becomes the church's responsibility to kind of make a way for them to get out of their grave and to live a new life rather than leaving people kind of trapped into their old life or trapped in the grave. This goes along with Jesus' command to unbind Lazarus, to loosen him from his grave clothes. I mean, he's alive and he needs help getting out of those grave clothes where they had wrapped him up for burial. And again, maybe this is the work of the church, to where when Jesus speaks and calls people to new life, it becomes the church's responsibility to help them make the changes into that new life, to help them kind of get unbound from the things that had clothed them for burial and to get into some attire that's appropriate for life. Maybe from clothes of burial to clothes of righteousness. All different ways we could think about it. But I think too often what happens is Jesus speaks and calls someone to life, and we, the church, are so slow to recognize that they're actually alive now, that Jesus has brought them from death to life. And we, the church, almost still treat them like they're dead, like they're trapped in sin, like they're buried, like they have never left their old life. And so we kind of just damned them into their old life when Jesus has actually given new life. I don't know. You may have some examples running through your mind. But the most important part of all of this is Jesus. That Jesus is the one who is able to give life to the dead. And he does it through his speech. He calls Lazarus by name, and Lazarus comes forth from the grave. They say that hearing is the last thing to go. And here's Lazarus, 4 days dead, stinking dead. But somehow Jesus' voice is able to penetrate the death, and Lazarus is able to hear. And he responds to Jesus' call, and he comes forth alive. You and I, alive because Jesus called our name, and we responded. And thankfully, there were people in our lives who helped remove the stones so that we could come forth, who helped get us out of grave clothes so that we could live the life that Jesus has for us. Jesus is the one who speaks life, calls our name, calls us forth from death to life. And that's our hope for loved ones, friends, family members that are kind of in the tomb right now, that are dead, that they maybe 4 days dead, maybe stinking dead, and everyone has given up hope on them. Well, Jesus' voice can penetrate all of that hopelessness, all of that death. Jesus' voice calls to life. And so we need to be sure on our end of it that one, we're seeking Jesus, and then we're listening to Jesus, removing stones, doing whatever he calls us to do, and ultimately trusting that he's going to call a name, just like he called our name. And that's where our hope is at for our loved ones, our friends, our neighbors, family who are dead right now. Jesus is the giver of life, and he calls the name of the dead, and they come to life. God bless you. Have a great day. And if Jesus is talking to you about rolling away any stones so that somebody can get out, or Jesus is talking to you about taking somebody's grave clothes off so that they can live rightly, listen to him. He is the life giver. God bless. Have a great day.